y'all. It's your man, Kill.
And I'm Chandel.
And you are tuned into the HK Couch, the official podcast of Horton's Kids and our media lab, brought to us by In a Perfect World.
Yep. And Horton's Kids is a nonprofit that serves communities in Anacostia.
Yes, sir. Now, today, we are chopping it up with, there's too many titles.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to honestly get started. I don't even know where to get started. So why don't you do yourself the justice of introducing yourself? Because we're gonna do it a disservice if we try to give everything that you do.
Yo, so Joseph Richardson, professor, University of Maryland, College Park, Department of African American Studies, Department of Anthropology, and I'm also a professor in the School of Medicine in the Department of Epidemiology and Public Health. And I'll leave it at that.
Nah, we can't leave it at that.
I know.
We gotta talk about this documentary.
Yes.
Man, you gotta put the producer, director, everything.
So that in my other life, on my other hat, I'm a producer and director. Life After the Gunshot documentary series, first episode, which really was more than an episode, it was a documentary shot on 10 of the young men that I work with. Me and my colleague, Che Bullock, who I met through actually being injured and treated at Prince George's Hospital Center, which now moved. We started a hospital violence intervention program. I started it in 2016. And then once we got up and running in 2017, Che was the first person I hired. He had been stabbed 13 times, medevac there. He became the violence intervention specialist. He's my young boy. And we decided that we wanted to film like 10 of the young brothers that we work with that were hit. So I don't know if y'all want me to explain what a hospital violence intervention program is.
We're gonna get into
that.
Yeah. I'm playing that. I'm playing Ali Shaheed this episode.
Oh my God.
So from that's how we ended up shooting the documentary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we were just talking. You're from Philly. Tell us about your journey from just being a young boy in Philly to getting into the work that you're doing right now.
So first of all, I would say young bull.
I was just
young bull.
Literally, it's something in the Philly water because I literally was about to say it's really young bull, not young boy.
I'm sorry.
So grew up in Philly, uptown, like.
Yes, sir.
Like my man here, my comrade. My mom is a school teacher. My father worked at Sears on the Boulevard in the warehouse for 30 years. On his off time, he was a jazz vocalist. It was like Jazz Vocalist of the Year, I think 1994, 95, around there. Shout out to my way uptown, the Yard. Grew up in a regular, like working, lower middle class neighborhood. So, had all the benefits of what it's like to live in a neighborhood and see people going to work every day. There was a lot of diversity in my neighborhood too. So I always tell people this, like in my neighborhood, because it was a neighborhood that was on the border of other neighborhoods. Like we had a mix of different people that lived in my hood. So like my neighbor that lived 2 houses down, he went to private school. So he played lacrosse. So he literally showed me like how to play lacrosse because he used to have a stick. He went to Abington Friends. So that was my neighbor that lived 2 houses down. Next to him, my neighbors all went to King. So it's called King.
Talk about
y'all
King.
Could basically understand it.
Anything named after Martin Luther King.
Y'all know what that type time the school is.
Right. Funny, I wanted to go to King, and my mom was like, nah. Not gonna happen.
Was it a little bit energetic?
It was just the school where everybody... as being a young kid, you want to be at wherever the violence is.
Okay.
And the violence is usually the cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so nice way to say a lot of energy.
Lots
It's an
of
energetic school.
Yeah, it was an energetic school.
Right. So King, Germantown, those were the schools uptown that you were zoned to. And then, I got another neighbor live on the other side of me. He's a cop. And somebody down on my block, he runs numbers. And this person over here... they could be in the JBM. I don't know if y'all know what the JBM is, but Junior Black Mafia, which succeeded the Black Mafia in Philly during the crack era. So you had all kinds of people. You had hustlers, private school kids, public school kids. Somebody just got out of jail. You know, they just did 10 years, and this person is a Q. But we all live in the same neighborhood.
Right.
So if you can imagine what that experience is like, it's pretty wild. So people would always ask me, like, how, you know, they would question my personality. Like, how are you able to move through all of these different environments, situations, et cetera? But that was a reflection of my neighborhood. And we played a lot of sports too. We played a lot of basketball.
Yeah. And it seems like it's something that helped you throughout your career, especially what you're doing right now. You're working with young men, because as you know, in this work, relatability is something that's extremely important when you're trying to build connections.
Yeah, no doubt. So, I mean, I work with guys now that have been shot, and, you know, when the crack era started, there were, you know, at least like 5 brothers around my way that I knew were killed. The first dude was one of my old heads who had got shot in another neighborhood, but he was the first person I actually seen after he had got shot, because he was cast up, he had the crutches and all of that. And before that, like I said, we run a lot of ball. My neighborhood is known for basketball, so he was like a real good dude. And after that, he kind of turned into a zombie. So he started taking like in Philly, we got pancakes and syrup, Xanax, and promethazine, you mix it up. He started taking that. And then, you know, his whole behavior just became bizarre. But I was younger, so I didn't really know what he was going through. At the time, you know, there weren't definitions of like, this person is going through trauma because they've been shot. And these are the symptoms of traumatic stress that they're dealing with, hypervigilance, you know, doing drugs, trying to self-medicate. Like, none of that was out at that time. So it was like wild just to see somebody's personality totally switch at that time and not know really what was happening. The only thing I could compare it to at that time was, you know, you would hear stories like, this person was in Vietnam and they came back home and now they kind of checked out. Like, he was like that, but he had been shot. So anyway, long story short, a few years later, he ended up getting shot on my block. He got shot in the head. And that always like stuck in my mind about like how his personality had totally changed. And then it was like maybe 4 or 5 other brothers that died from gun violence and some that had been shot. And so I carried that with me, you know, from the time that I went to school. And then once I went to graduate school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I just ended up going to graduate school, quite frankly. People always ask like how I became a professor. I didn't want to do this. Like, it was totally by happenstance. And I was in graduate school and I was getting a master's degree. And the first year that I had come into my program, the first year was paid for. So the next year when I was coming back, I didn't have any money. So I told the dean, I was like, I don't think I'm coming back. I'm just going to do whatever. And he was like, well, let me see if I could find you the money. And so maybe a few days later, he called me back. He was like, I got some good news and some bad news. Which one you want first? And I was like, all right, I want the good news. He was like, well, the good news is I found the money. The bad news is, depending on how you take it, like, you're in a doctoral program right now. So
wow.
he put me in it.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
Is that good or bad news? That's like
a
good
whole-
news and good news.
Yeah.
He put me in it. And he had retired that year. So, you know, the next thing I know, I was in a PhD program. And it just kind of went from there. And so moved around a lot and ended up doing a study in Harlem on junior high school students to understand the social context of adolescent violence. And my dissertation chair at the time was an anthropologist. And at the school where I was, Rutgers School of Criminal Justice, it was highly quantitative. Everything was statistical. So I knew I didn't want to do that. So when the anthropologist came into the school, he had already done a study of being fully immersed in the community, like following people. And so when he had presented it to me, the opportunity to do this study on kids who were in junior high and understand how they navigated the social context of adolescent violence in New York, I was like, so what I got to do? He was like, well, you got to follow these kids and you got to write about them. And I was like, so I'm gonna get paid for that? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, that's a job? He was like, yeah. I was like, sign me up. So I ended up going to a junior high school in Central Harlem, IS 275, shout out to them. And I picked 25 kids from two seventh grade classrooms, 15 boys, 10 girls, and I basically followed them every day. So I followed them in school, I followed them in the neighborhood. I was a basketball coach. Shout out to Harlem in the Faith. I won the championship my first year. Shout out to my squad up there. And I ended up learning a lot because at that time, the Bloods and Crips was becoming big in New York. And so I had a lot of kids that were Blood and Crip. So, I got to learn a lot about like why that was happening on the streets in Harlem, why kids, this project, they Blood, this project over here is Crip. Maybe half the project over here might be Blood and another end of the project is Crip. So that started coming into play. And I had some kids, I had one kid in my group that had got shot.
In junior high school?
Yeah. Wow. And he had got shot and he shot somebody. So he had to move to out of state. I don't want to say where he went, but he ended up going out of state. And so from that point on, it was like, that was like my job. I was immersed in it. I've been writing about it. I've been following kids that was a lifestyle. And so, once I graduated, that was my dissertation. Once I graduated, I went to University of Chicago for a postdoc on the South Side. And then I came to Maryland, and one night I was watching CNN Black in America. It was actually the first episode. And one of the segments was on a trauma surgeon at University of Maryland Shock Trauma, a brother who had started a hospital violence intervention program. And I'm watching it. I'm tripping like, I didn't even know something like that existed. So I'm watching like how he's operating on people. Then after he patches them up, he's then trying to get them involved in services to prevent them from coming back to the hospital or dying. And so I thought it was fascinating. His name is Dr. Cornell Cooper, still my mentor to this day. And I cold called him like the next day. I was like, yo, I saw you on CNN. I'm really fascinated with the work that you're doing. I would love to like pick your brain. He invited me up there. I went up there. First day I was on the Discovery Channel. He had always been on TV. So he ended up becoming my mentor, and I ended up learning under him in Baltimore, where it's gunshots every day coming into shock trauma. And then he shifted off to PG Hospital. He became the chief medical officer over there. And once he was over there, I was like, would it be cool if I use the trauma center as my lab to understand gun violence and like what was happening in the lives of brothers that was getting shot and they coming into the hospital, like what actually happened to them when they left and what led to them being shot. And so he was like, cool, you could do your thing. So I ended up doing a study with like 25 young brothers that had been hit, and Che was one of them. And from that study, I ended up developing the hospital violence intervention program there, which still runs to this day. So I founded it. It was the first hospital violence intervention program in D.C. Worked closely with Kenyon McDuffie. Y'all know Kenyon McDuffie, councilman at large. Shout out to him. I helped, many ways, helped him frame the NEAR Act, which funded hospital violence intervention programs in D.C. Now there's 6. When I started, it was 1. And there's going to be a 7th. Actually, it's going to be here in Congress Heights, I think. So, that was basically the route.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because you talk about what happens after.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing that so many people, we never know what happens after. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's kind of like even in the movies,
Yeah.
He gets killed, but then it's like, what happens the next day after Ricky
Right.
gets killed? How does that affect the neighborhood when, someone gets killed? So I think the thing that's just so amazing about the work you're doing is it's dealing with the post.
Right.
And so many of us, we don't know what happens. We see it in the paper, but we don't know what happens to that family after. We don't know what happens to that neighborhood after. So it's amazing that you're doing that work, man.
Yeah. And one huge thing that I loved your documentary. I felt like it was a beautiful piece of art that told the story of gun violence, not only from the person who is being directly impacted by it, the family, but also the workers. That's a very huge part that you don't see, the people that's doing the work and dealing with the community, in order to help these people come back out in society and even just be the holders of their trauma, right?
Right.
Just offloading. So we're going to get into this, but before we start off and we talk about the work and we get into this documentary, because I was taking notes. Like, I was like, oh my God. I felt like I was in a therapy session. I was like, ooh, maybe I have some trauma, right? Just define violence prevention. What is it?
So for me, it's preventing. It's more upstream. So you have prevention and you have intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And so on the prevention side, it's about getting to young kids and children before they actually are engaged in violence, either on the offending side or the victimization side. But once they are hit, then that's when the intervention comes in, because in the hospital world, like, the reason why it's so critically important for us to intervene when somebody's been shot is that, like, up to 65% of all the people who shot, they'll come back. We call that trauma recidivism. So think about it, just put it in a context. If we had 10 people on the trauma floor and we had 10 GSWs, meaning gunshot wounds, 6 of them, this is their second, third, fourth times here. We had some young dudes, like 19 years old, have been shot like every year for 3 straight years. Like, he was shot when he was 17, shot when he was 18, shot when he was 19. So what we really trying to do is prevent, like, that cycle of people coming back to the hospital multiple times for an injury. And, you know, suffice to say, like, when we started the program, we had it up and running. We had 116 people, and we had 1 person come back.
Oh,
so
wow.
if you really do the math, like, it's less than 1%. So when we started at our hospital alone, our trauma recidivism rate was 32%. So that meant, like, 1 out of every 3 people injured, like, the second, third, fourth time. So the fact that we prevented 115 people from coming back, and the 1 person that did come back, we know what happened. It wasn't like a situation where he went out, he was hustling in the street and trying to do his thing. He was in a situation that actually we could have prevented. So I take it on, you know, my back and my shoulders that he ended up getting hit again. So, you know, we work on the intervention side on that. But on the prevention, right? Sorry about that. I'm also serve as the co-chair for DC Violence Fatality Review. And so for anybody who doesn't know that, like, a lot of cities have homicide reviews. And the homicide reviews, we take cases from specific years and we review everything that was tied to that person's murder. So for DC, you know, if we're analyzing, let's just say last year, there were 203 homicides. So let's just say we take, out of that year, we might take 30 people, a subsample of the 203. And we go through forensically their whole lives. So we have their entire lives on paper. So it's multiple people represent agencies from around DC, DC Department of Health, DC Metropolitan Police Department, Office of the Attorney General. You might have Department of Behavioral Health, DC Public Schools. Like, we're all around the table, DYRS. And so we get data from every single agency on that person's life. So we can get to see how many times you've been in the hospital, how many times you've been in a doctor, for what? What were your grades like in school? How often did you attend school? Were you in the child welfare system? Were you under DYRS? We get to see your entire life on paper, like every agency in DC. If you were connected to those agencies or in contact, we have records on that. So we go through our analysis as a group and we try to determine, all right, what were the points of intervention? Where could we have intervened in this person's life to prevent them from actually being on this list that we're reviewing right now? And so we get a lot of young kids, like, and I'm just saying young because of my age, but, we get a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds that we review, right? And one of the things that I see is consistent. This goes back to prevention. When I see things I see consistently across the board is that young people who unfortunately die from, early mortality from gun violence, you can often trace the problems that started with school. Like starts with chronic absenteeism, no doubt. So if you start seeing a kid that's not going to school, you need to really intervene.
So that's like point one right there.
Yeah.
Like that's the number one thing.
Yeah, the number one thing I see consistently, but also it's like adverse childhood experiences too. And we see that when we dealing with guys that have been shot. When we start going back into their background, we realize the trauma, like it didn't start when they got hit. Mm-hmm. It started like early on. So you could have like a kid who, he might have watched his mother and father constantly involved in domestic violence, mm-hmm. right? Somebody might have got injured out of that. But if you're watching that and you're 6, mm-hmm. and you're watching that until, for 12 years, and you never talked to anybody about it, it's an adverse childhood experience. And unfortunately, they have these scales, adverse childhood experience scales. It's called the ACEs. Mm-hmm. One was just designed for a general population, and then they have another called the Urban ACEs, which came out of Philly. And basically, you can ask questions and kind of check off whether you actually experienced this. Have you experienced your parent being incarcerated before? Mm-hmm. Have you watched someone in your house get hit? Were you hit by your parent? And basically, the more you check off, the higher a number is. Means that if those things, those behaviors or things that you witnessed go undiagnosed and untreated, it's more likely to manifest itself in your adult behaviors, mm-hmm. right? Things that happen to you as a child. So, which is why in the film we say like within every adult is a broken child, because we hear those stories. Like somebody will be hit, they could be 25, 30, and they'll start telling us about what happened when they were 10. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like my father used to lock me in the closet, right, and not let me out for, so-and-so amount of hours, because he was like, yeah, if you want to be in jail, this is how jail feel. Mm-hmm. So let me just put this person like in the bathroom and just leave you in there. Just like wild parenting behaviors, mm-hmm. right? And so that has an effect on kids ultimately. And if that just goes unaddressed, then more than likely, like those things start showing themselves as you become an adult. Mm-hmm. So in terms of prevention, like you really want to go upstream. And as we always try to say that all the time, like downstream is like me looking at your case and your name is part of a homicide fatality review. Like it's too late. Or you're hit up, you're in a trauma unit with us, like you've been hit up. And unfortunately, it could be like you're hit up and it's permanent damage. Like you might not be able to walk. Like I've been with young dudes that like they're paralyzed. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So we trying to stop all that before they even get further downstream to us, where we just pulling the bodies out the stream and wondering like, wow, these bodies coming down here. Mm-hmm. We really need to go upstream and figure out, all right, this is where we need to intervene at.
Mm-hmm. One thing you said, I was on TikTok. I love TikTok. I tell killers all the time. And a fellow was on TikTok and he was saying that the reason why we have children is for us to raise or relive the inner child inside of us, because we're raising our kids to have the experiences of childhood that we didn't have, right? And that kind of brought me back to what I saw in your documentary when Slim, and to ask you to tell us about your documentary. He was talking about, I think he referenced that, like, yeah, you see those children, I know what they're going to grow up to be because I already know what it's like. I was them, right? So this idea, like you just said, how like some parents are parenting from the inner child or the childhood experiences that they already had, which bring you back to your ACEs, right? And it's so unfortunate that in this particular environment where we're seeing a lot of gun violence, that the cycle of just violence and trauma is cyclical, right? It's like a cycle. It's always going. It's almost like a loop. It kind of reminds me of that Netflix movie with Jamie Foxx, like
the Clone Tyrone.
Who cloned Tyrone, right?
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was just like, It makes sense. So just tell us tell us a little about your documentary, the title, what it's about, because I would love for us to just talk a little bit about take actually a deep dive into your documentary.
Yeah. So the documentary is called Life After the Gunshot. And as I said, it initially started out as 10 digital stories. And the reason why Che and I decided to do it, we executive produced it together. Like, as an academic, I was sick of like writing papers and putting them in academic journals that no one in my community would read. So, we're doing all of this for the sake of science, and like that's great to be cited scientifically, et cetera. But I think the more powerful message I wanted to get out is I wanted the people to really see like what I saw. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, if you could be in a fly on the wall in my world, this is what my world looks like from the perspective of their world. And so it started out as we were just going to do 10 like vignettes, and we have a studio on University of Maryland's campus. So we brought 10 guys in individually, and we started, asking them questions. What was it like the day that you got hit? Walk us through that. When you first got hit, like, what was going through your mind? A lot of dudes might say, I was thinking about my kids, and I had to survive for my kids. Shout out to my young boy Smack, because before I did Life After the Gunshot, I did Bullets Without Names. I don't know if y'all saw that.
No, I didn't get to see that one. No.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Right. Like, I'm going to have to watch it.
I'm just a professor.
So Bullets. So shout out to Amberly Ellis, who was my former student as filmmaker. So she and I collaborated, and we did one guy that I worked with that got shot. And it was like a 15-minute short documentary. We had got nominated for a Sony Award for that. But anyway, long story short, we did Smack. And I remember like when we did him, and he was telling the story, and he was saying how like he had to run to get help because he was thinking about his kids. Like, listen, I can't die out there in the street. So that always stuck with me. And then so when we decided to do Life After the Gunshot, when we did the 10 guys, we would like hear that narrative. And I think that really led to asking more questions about vulnerability, because the relationships that we have built with all of the young dudes that we worked with, we had gotten to the point where they really trusted us to be vulnerable. So when people are watching it, they're like, how did y'all get them to talk about all of that? But I'm like, that's like a year in of relationship building. Mm-hmm. I'm going to divert for a minute because I want to make this point about the difference between men and women. So we work now with me and Che. We doing another digital storytelling project with women in Baltimore that have been shot as a result of community violence. So like they could be hanging out with their man and somebody after their man, and their man get hit, they get hit. Or they might be in the street and they just getting hit. Mm-hmm. They the target. What I found about with women, like women, you don't even have to know women really well. If you really just have a vibe with women, they connect. Like the first time you sit in the seat, they'll tell you what's going on. Like, you don't have to do a lot of like
deep diving
and being like super patient and super persistent to develop the relationship in the way you do with men. Men, it's like you gotta make a real investment in a relationship with men before a man will tell you anything. Definitely not on camera. Like, men are not going to tell you all. So it's interesting to work with Black women who are like, yo, this is what's going on. Like, they just being real off the rip. And then you deal with brothers, and it's like it'd take a year for a brother to really divulge what's really happening in his life. So, we were able to get brothers to the point of just, being like vulnerable, and telling their story. And I really had appreciated that. And so after we finished the 10 guys, we had money left from our grant. And my grant manager was like, Joe, you still have money left, and you could either, we don't have to turn it back. So you need to think about what you want to do with it, which is a good thing in the grant world. So then me and Che was like, all right, so what are we going to do? He's like, bet, let's just expand the scope of the documentary to everybody we know that works in that space. So we were like, all right, let's include the trauma surgeon that we cool with. Yeah. Let's include some violence interrupters that we know. Let's include Kenyon McDuffie. He's in it. He wasn't in the first episode, but we filmed him talking about legislation and what gun violence legislation is important. We filmed Judge Alexander Williams, who, has a crazy story. He runs the center out of my department, Judge Alexander Williams Center, but he was a federal judge during the crack era. So he had to put a lot of people in jail under mandatory minimums, and he hated it, right? And once he got off the bench, he tried to go back and get a lot of them out. So we have him, his story is written in the Washington Post. So we have him in the film. We got like everybody. Anybody, Moten, who check it, Ron Moten, he's in it. Mm-hmm. We got a lot of people in it, a lot of people. You've seen Tony. Tony's in it, Tony Lewis.
Yeah, Tony Lewis Jr.
Tony's in it. Shout out to Tony, and shout out to his dad,
who's home.
And Tony does my class every year because I use his book. I don't know if any of y'all know his book, Slug, but if you don't, you need to get it. This is autobiography, and fortunately, last year, Tony rolled up and brought his father to my class, so it was
That's
wild.
crazy.
Because the book is about his relationship with his father as his father was incarcerated, and before he was incarcerated. But to have him and his dad there in my class, like, lecturing was amazing. Yeah. So shout out to him. But we had everybody that, we wanted to tap into everybody in DC that worked in that space.
Yeah.
So ultimately, after we did all of that, we had, of course, hours of footage. And we just started chopping it down. And we got down to like 98 minutes, and then we knew we had so much footage left. We was like, all right, this got to be episodic. Like, we have to create episodes for it. And so we just let that one go. Shout out to my editor, G, too. It was amazing. So we let that go, and then it just started gaining a life of its own, and it's just started taking off. So we've been in film festivals. We've traveled around the country. We were in L.A. this summer, me, Che, and Fresh, who plays Slim, who's Slim. I'm not saying he playing it like he an actor, but who is Slim in the film.
Yeah. And
so we've gone around a lot. We've done like our rounds as a group.
Yeah.
Sometimes the three of us, sometimes me and Che, but it's gained a lot of attention. I would say primarily one of the things that somebody brought to my attention, which I had never really thought about. We were in LA and we were screening it at Giffords, which is the National Community Violence Intervention Conference. And somebody had said to me, they were like, Doc, it was like, your film is probably the only other film that really shows hospital violence intervention program from the standpoint, as you mentioned in the outset, that's comparable to The Interrupters. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie The Interrupters that was shot in Chicago. It won a lot of awards. Shout out to Amina and everybody that was in that film. But that was a classic to me, in terms of documentaries. And so for somebody to say that our film was on par with that, I was really that's a real solid compliment. So I'm proud of it.
That's dope. That's dope. Now tell me this. You've been doing this work for so long, so I know you've seen changes and everything that's going on, and we've seen so much. It's getting younger now. Yeah. So when you talked about youth earlier on and you said 18 to 24, I'm like, I feel like that was that's them old days. Now we're seeing 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. We're seeing everything that's happening. What do you think is shifting the weight now?
Man, that's a good question, brother. One of the things I would definitely start with is the impact of social media. Yes. I think the fact that kids just have access to all of this in their hand.
Right.
And they just get to see everything that I can't imagine being 10 or 12 and having a phone and having access to all the information that's out there right now. When I look back at our worlds was just so small.
It was uptown.
Right. Yeah. It was uptown. It was like you just thought about what your block was, or like who lived in the next neighborhood and where you ran ball at or where you played sports at, and going to this party that might be a house party in your neighborhood or whatever. But like to have the whole world in the palm of your hand and see anything and everything possible, I think it's just totally changed the narrative of what's happening out there. And the music. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? It's like we got a whole national drill scene now.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you in Chicago or you in Philly or you in DC, like everybody drilling.
Right.
And so I think that's critically important too. And then, you watching social media, and even as an adult, and people can't front, like you're watching it and you might see somebody you think like, oh, they look like they getting money. Right? And then people start thinking about themselves and looking at themselves in the mirror like, well, why am I not getting money? Why am I not going on these fly trips to Dubai?
Yeah.
Right? What's happening in my life? But you don't really know this person's situation. You could be scamming to get that. Right? But you just looking at it from the outside, making judgment calls about yourself. And that's with adults, right?
Yeah.
So imagine kids that are watching that, right? The other day, man, my godson, he got hit up in the summer. Got hit on his birthday, in fact, in Jersey. Got shot in the femur, and he almost bled out. And prior to him getting shot, he young, at the time. I think not the age group we talking about, but I'm gonna make this point because it kind of connects to it. It's like he's 25, he's on the gram, he flossing. You know what I'm saying? He goes up in the club. I don't know if he pinned his location or not, but he's in the club and he's live. Like, people, that's what I'm saying about social media. Like, you just basically put out your whole situation on social media. And whoever out there that's a wolf or wolves, you're going to become food.
Right.
And that's what he became. You know what I'm saying? They came up, tried to rob him. I don't know if, what they got, but in the end, they shot him. So he goes to rehab, over the summer. He had to go to rehab, learn how to walk, all of that. So now he's back on the gram. And the other day, he's showing all of his jewels.
Again?
Wow. Showing his jewels, his money, his clothes, his sneakers. Got this type sweatsuit on, got this type of sneakers on, like everything I got on fly. And I DM'd him like, godson, yo, what is you doing? Like, yo, you out of pocket right now. You need to slow down. You showing too much of your life. Like, why are you trying to prove to everybody that you up because you got hit? Now you want to prove that you want to come back? Slow down.
Yeah.
Bro,
you know what I'm saying?
That social media thing is so real. Me and Shandell always talk about it, and it's almost like from a biblical standpoint, it's like God didn't want us to eat from the tree of life. You don't need to know everything.
You don't.
That's what I told him. That's exactly what
you don't need to know everything. And like you said, with this social media, you have 10-year-olds who have access to just too much. You can ask Siri whatever you want. Any crazy question you got, you can ask.
Yeah, or even just seeing other people doing things, right? And you being intrigued. I always tell Kill, I was like, if I did not have a conscience, I'd probably be the best criminal out there from all the Netflix research, all the social media, all the things that's out there that tells you how to do the crime. And then you coming back out and wanting to show off the fruits, quote unquote, fruits of your easy labor. Yeah. So I think people are just really addicted to the like. And I think the young kids can't decipher between reality and the cloud, right? Like in reality, this is your life. But on Instagram or TikTok or wherever else, you can be a whole other person, and they're fighting for that person that's in the cloud. It's like you're an avatar, But what I would say is, like, that is their reality.
I was just about to say, that's their life.
That's their life. There is no, like...
What this is happening right now?
Like, distinction in the lines. That's part of their life.
Okay.
Like, social media is part of their lifestyle. Like, for us, it might be like, all right, I'm able to compartmentalize that social media. This is what I'm really doing in real life. And some people can't even get that straight.
Right.
But for them, that's a natural part of their life. They move between that and what they're doing on that and what they're doing outside, like I don't really think there's much of a difference that much anymore.
That makes sense.
Which
Because
is
they
why
were born into this.
Yeah,
That's true,
they born
too.
and showing what they part of that general. Like if I don't show it, it ain't happening.
Yeah.
Right. So that's part of their lifestyle, really.
And that's very scary because you only have one life. It's not like you can go back and eat a mushroom and you got an extra life. No, seriously. You only have one life. If something happens to you, it's going to happen to you. Like, it's not like you can get another leg that you can grow, or another finger, something that, well, I mean, technology, but it's only one of you. And for you to think that way sometimes, where you're feeling like I can't differentiate between the two, is kind of crazy. It's crazy for me. I understand I'm a little bit older. I'm only 25, but
she's only 25.
I'm only 25. But I'm just saying, like, the idea of just having that one singular thought is very, very scary.
Right.
And I think it is too. It's like you said, because we've had kids who I've asked, would you rather have 10? I think I said 5 good friends who will be there with you your whole life. They will hold you down. Or would you rather have 10,000 followers on Instagram? It's not even a thought. 10,000 followers on Instagram is kill. What you talking about? Like, why are you even at? Like, what are you talking about? Of course I want that. And to me, that's where it's like, there is no, like with me, I'm on Twitter. I'm like, oh, this is real life. And then there's Twitter. These kids, it's just that. It's whatever that is. And I think that's the thing, back to your godson, it could be the addiction. Because we are living in a time when if I don't see it, then it didn't happen. We grew up in an era where if I come back and I said, yo, I was down north, we did woo, 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 you listening, we all good, we laughing. You try to do that now, where's the video?
Right.
Where's the proof that it happened?
Yep.
That's why we have a lot of our young girls being taped.
Right.
Because I can't just come back and say, yo, Doc, I was with old girl, da-da-da-da. Where's the proof?
Where's the proof at?
And that's the problem, So the social media piece thing is so huge. Is there anything else that you would say you kind of see?
I would say too, like the lack of investment in terms of the resources that are out there in the communities for kids, like even from a mental health standpoint. Like, I think there's much more trauma and exposure to it because of social media and because the way neighborhoods are right now, where it's not, you don't have that level of cohesion in the neighborhoods like we used to have. And so I think a lot of it is the result of, like, mass incarceration, taking a whole lot of brothers and sisters out of the community, just extracting, significant levels of social capital out of that community that could be a resource, and people are gone for 10, 15, 20 years. And we see that now in the violence intervention work, like, it was a huge gap. People were pulled out of their neighborhoods and now they coming back and they want to come back into the communities and like have an impact. But, for some of these young people, particularly under the age of 18, like, who really cares that you used to run the block when you was, in 1995, like, they not thinking about that. These kids is like, look, I'm on my own type time right now. Like, your whole world, you an old head, your whole world don't have really nothing to do with me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I think, like, there's a time and place for old heads, old heads like myself to be like, all right, we have to be able to also socialize the next generation to fill the spots that we were in. And not really trying to, like, take all the glory of the things that we might have missed out on and trying to catch up, instead of being like, all right, I'm going to take this little young boy right here. He might be 21. I'm going to school him how to be a violence intervention specialist, right? And so he gets the hands-on, right? Because, sometimes we can suck up all the air in the room. And that's the conversations that I hear right now. They're like, it's a lot of old against young right now. You see it you can see it in hip-hop. You can see it in culture. It's like we just at odds more so than any other time that I've ever seen. And I think that's part of the situation too, is like, I don't know where I wouldn't say the respect, but the disconnect. Like, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and she said something to me that was so profound. She was like, Doc, you know what? this generation to me is unrecognizable. And I had to sit back and think. I was like, wow, that's kind of true.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so I think like the spaces where, you know, at one point in time we had generationally different people all in one physical space. Now that it's shifted over to social media and COVID, it's like that space is gone. So for example, getting back to my neighborhood, like we had 2 basketball courts in my neighborhood, and everybody in my neighborhood, that was the center of our socialization. Like it wasn't just about playing ball. It was like, you know, whatever. You shot dice, you smoked, you drank, you learned how to fight, you learned how to speak up for yourself, you learned how to shut up and listen.
There you go, right there.
Right? When somebody old was talking, you fell back and didn't say nothing. You kept your mouth shut. You knew when to keep your mouth shut. You knew when to engage and not engage and disengage. Like all of those rules are gone because we don't have different people from different generations like in one space.
Right.
Like that's what my school was. But forget college. Like my school started there, like learning from old heads in my neighborhood, watching things.
Right.
Like watching somebody, you know, become, like, for example, one of the dudes in my neighborhood said Napoleon. He was in Pieces of a Dream. I seen him pull up in a, like, looking like Money Making Mitch from Paid in Full, pulling up in the Saab and keeping your car clean, and an old head putting you in a car and taking you somewhere like, yo, young boy, take a ride with me. And it wasn't on some malicious, like, I'm going to give you a gun and you need to hop out and shoot this person. It was like, take a ride with me because, like, I like you. I want to meet you.
Pieces of a Dream is a jazz group that's from Philly. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Easy. So, like, I think that is missing.
Yeah.
Too, right? It's like, where's the spaces for different generations of men to congregate? Because you drive by any court right now, in most hoods, of course, it's empty.
Yep.
Right? You got AAU, but you need money for that. Right? It's a certain circuit. Not everybody's going to get on that circuit. Right? So where's the interaction happen? It just organically in your neighborhood. Where's that happening?
And how can we bring that back? I know it's always a battle for us, you know, dealing with kids in the out of school time space, or even trying to interact with community members and trying to bring them back to and bringing them into spaces where we can socialize. Right. And this idea of we can agree to disagree, or I can listen to your opinion, or we can do activities together. We're seeing less and less people wanting to do that. It's almost like you have to teach people how to socialize again. Right. And that's crazy for people who have always been in-person people for majority of their life. So what are your thoughts on how we can bring that back? How can we bring back that idea where we're having multi-generational people on the basketball court or in the community talking to each other?
Man, people gotta get out of, you know, their comfort zone and not be afraid to, like, I think a lot of times people are scared again. They probably scared the kids. They probably, again, saying, you know, it's not recognizable to me. I'm not really going to deal with it. But, you know, I'm just going to deal with my own world. And COVID even kind of accelerated that, because COVID made it now. You can see the after effects. Like, people like, yo, I rock with the people I'm with over here. I'm not really messing with nobody. So I think we have to get out of our comfort zone. But the other thing I would say is, in terms of what else has happened, is like there are no rules.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
And that's the thing that I learned, again, being outside. There were like rules to things. There's rules to the game, right? Any game. If you playing ball, there's rules. There's rules to the game. You walk, you travel, you double dribble. Like, you fouled me. Like, there's rules to it. It's like now is you ask any young person, like, what's the rules? And they're like, the rule is there are no rules.
And any game without no rules, it's like anarchy.
And it's anarchy. It's chaos.
Yeah.
And that's where we at. It's like there's no real rules to it. There's no structure.
Right.
And that's what we got to get back to, like, just putting structure. And I tried to say, you know, everybody that I work with in DC that does CVI, and it's a lot of people I could shout out. You know, I would definitely want to shout out Rallo too, who's down at NARC. And I remember I was having a conversation with Rallo, and we was talking about this, and we were saying like, maybe you just start out with like 3 rules, and like you don't move to like 10. You know, I can't take an inventory of how many rules there was in my neighborhood about how you had to move, or throughout the city of Philadelphia. But like, instead of starting with 10 or 20, we just start with like 3. These are the 3 rules we gonna live by. And once we can adhere to these rules, we'll add 3 more rules on. But we will start with these 3. All right, it's gonna be, you know, if you decide, because I don't think we ever gonna get rid of people fighting. Like, that's not gonna end. But I would say, like, if you are going to fight, everybody got to put their phone down.
Yes.
Right.
That's a huge.
That's rule number 1.
Yeah.
We gonna
kid
scrap. There's gonna be no phone.
I had a kid tell me once, Mr. Kill, I'll be a meme before. I mean, I'll kill somebody before I become a meme.
Yeah.
Because he was saying the difference with you and your. Because you know, I tell him about Broad Island and everything. It's like you get jumped there, nobody sees you. But now when you're getting jumped, everybody got their phone out. Everything like that. So I love that rule. Put the phones down.
If you're gonna fight, just put the phone. And whoever has a phone, they violated the rule.
Yeah.
Like, we just have to indoctrinate that. Like, nobody has a phone. If they fight, they fight.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It doesn't go viral like, you know.
Right.
It went from the people who were there to like everybody in your neighborhood now knows. Like, that's a lot of pressure.
And it's not just everybody in the neighborhood.
Everybody in the world. Everybody in the world.
One of my kids was like, yo, my cousin from Atlanta is calling me like, yo, you got knocked out. Like, that's too much pressure.
That's
you don't want to fight as is back in the day.
It's
but now having to fight and knowing there's a million people.
It's a lot of pressure.
And all the comments that come with that.
Kids have a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
You know, that by the mere fact that everybody can see it. Like, everybody's tapped in. And then the person who's doing the filming who actually hits IG first is the one that gets the followers, right? So it's also the chase of, like, who's going to film it? Can I get it out first? Can that turn into followers for me? So I think, like, rule number 1 is, again, like, I'm not advocating that people be out in the street fighting, but I don't think we're going to end that.
Yeah.
But I'd rather get to somebody going with their hands and nobody knows about it except for the people who were there.
Right.
What did you say in the documentary? You said guns down, gloves up?
Yeah, guns down, gloves up.
Yeah. And we got a lot of situations too, like in the documentary, where, you know, people are getting injured by the person that they're cool with.
Yeah, that's one thing that...
Like, it's like, my man shot me. That was big for us. Like, who hit you? And he like, my man did. He like, man did it? Like, yeah, like, that's crazy.
Now, what's the science behind that?
You know, I tried to, I'm gonna get a little sociological right now, but I'm gonna do it in a sociological way that we can all understand. So, like, I looked at domestic violence and intimate partner violence, particularly IPV, right? And like, 2 people are in a relationship. They might not even live together, but they're in a relationship because they're so close with each other. It's easy to violate somebody when you're close with them. And that violation leads to, depending on how you want to carry it could lead to you wanting to injure somebody. And I was like, but that always is in a romantic context, right? But I think we need a new term for, like, when 2 brothers are in an intimate relationship, and not intimate like they're romantically in a relationship. They're in an intimate relationship. This is his man. This is day 1. You've been over his crib.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know my mom. I know your mom. Know your sister. Know your brother. Like, you family. But the violation happens, right? And a lot of times when we're not dealing with people who have a high level of emotional intelligence, they just gonna flip to what they know best, to lash out. And particularly as somebody who was close to me, violated me, now I feel like I gotta have some get back in that situation.
Yeah.
So, you know, I would say, like, how do we even frame that? Like, I was trying to think, like, how do you talk about 2 young men came up together, they like this, but one person feels like their trust was totally violated.
Mm-hmm.
And now like they're just distrustful of the world. And that's what we see a lot of, like in terms of trauma. Like trauma creates such an insane level of distrust. Like after that violation happens, people will be like, man, I ain't really messing with nobody. Yeah. So, I would say like with my man shot me, I think it's just about someone felt like the way I would handle a situation and the expectations that they would have for someone else, people don't live up to their expectations. And that's, I think sometimes we gotta temper our expectations too, because what I might do in a situation might not be what my man would do in a situation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Might handle situations totally different. Yeah. And that might become offensive to me. Mm-hmm. Like, bro, I wouldn't have did that to you. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's a certain level of maturity and emotional intelligence, again, where you just got to put your emotions in check. Mm-hmm. And we dealing in, quite frankly, I think we dealing in an era now where, like, a lot of people aren't very emotionally intelligent. Like, they just can't keep their emotions in check. Like, they 0 to 100 over the most pettiest thing. And that's how we end up with so many people out here, like with bodies, because it's just the randomness of somebody couldn't keep their emotions in check, whether, it was a violation of the relationship or something they saw on social media, they felt violated. It's just like the emotional intelligence levels now is like super low.
Right. And one thing that was that came up, like you just said in the documentary, was the idea of trust and how, like you said, a lot of people lost trust. But one other thing that I loved that's a part of your program is the idea that you're teaching people about trauma, right? Because I don't think a lot of people know, or a lot of people in the communities that we work with know that they're being traumatized. It's just like a everyday life. And I loved how you use the web of, this is trauma. These are all the things that traumatized you. And then I want us to talk about your coping mechanisms, right? Like what's in your box. It was like all these positive things like breathing techniques, meditations, all that good stuff. And you were asking them like, okay, so what do you do to unwind or to help you go to get through this trauma? And the first thing that came up was like weed. I smoke. So how much does substance abuse play a part in the process of dealing with gun violence or violence in general?
Huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the primary way that, with the hood is self-medicating. I think there's other ways now too with, the level of drugs that's out there. But I would definitely start with weed first, drinking. But I think, people are looking for a way out to cope. And again, just in terms of mental health, like you're walking around, you're traumatized, something is wrong with you. You can't put a name to it, right? And I think that's what we were able to do, like clinically be able to put a name to it, but also in a way that people felt comfortable in the space to even talk about what's going on. And that often happens through like peer support. Mm-hmm. So you need to have brothers in the room that have been through the same situation, and you only need really one person, and you're always going to have one person. If you guys 5 or 6 brothers in the room, there's always going to be one person who just going to keep it just totally a honey. Mm-hmm. And that's going to open up the conversation for everybody else to be like, you know what, I feel like that. Mm-hmm. Like when like I might, when I go outside, I'm looking at everybody's pocket. Like if you got your hands in your pocket, I'm automatically like, what's about to happen? Or I don't really like being in places where it's a lot of people because I don't know who shot me, and I don't know if the person who shot me might be in here because I don't know who did it, right? And so once one person says that, then that leads to another conversation. So I'm gonna tell you an interesting story. We started working with brothers in Baltimore. This is unrelated to the film, but we started working with brothers in Baltimore who had been shot. We had like 10 guys in our group. And the very first day that we started, the first thing that I asked them was, what did they want to call a group? Because I knew they were against saying it was therapy or counseling. So they were immediately like, nah, doc, we don't want to call it therapy. We don't want to call it counseling. We're not crazy, so let's not put that stigma on it. So what do y'all want to call it? So they said, we'll call it peer healing, and they call it a peer healing circle. So we would meet every week by Zoom. We had dudes from East Baltimore, West Baltimore, and everybody was showing their face too, for the most part.
That's huge.
And if you know the history of Baltimore, you know
East and West side.
To get East and West side together.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of dudes that was reputable on both sides of the city, and so one of the groups that we did a focus group, and after I turned the Zoom recording off, like it just went into a real conversation because one of the dudes I don't want to go too deep into it, but basically, he had conflict with somebody in his neighborhood. And, every now and then that conflict would make him think about whether he wanted to retaliate, based on the injury that he had. And so he had presented that to the group. I was surprised that he even put his situation out there to the group. But I guess he was like, all right, everybody around his I won't say table, but in his Zoom, like it seemed like everybody around on his Zoom thorough, like everybody in the street. So I'm gonna ask street dudes what do they think, how I think I should move in this situation. That's basically what he put out there. And like for the next 2 hours, I would say nobody tried to convince him not to do what he was gonna do, but they gave him the real about all the different consequences that was gonna be part of that if he did it. So nobody was like, nah, bro, you shouldn't do that at all. Like nobody was talking about the ledge, but everybody was real like, all right, if you choose to do this, this is one scenario that could happen. It's another scenario. This is another scenario. These are all the possibilities that could come out of this that you're going to have to deal with. And so we break. We talked for like 2 hours. And that's when I was like, all right, we got something. When we came back the next week, the boy who put it out on the table, like what was going on with him, before we even started the group, he was like, before we start, Doc, I just want to thank everybody for like their input because it changed my mind. It changed the way I was thinking about what I was doing. And from that very point on, every single week when we started, one of the dudes in the group would put out their situation to the group. And it could be something that was dealing with, it could be street, it could be dealing with romantic relationships, something going on with this person's girl, this going on with their wife, this going on with their kids, something going on at their job. They would throw it out there. And then the group would just, like they did in that situation, where they would like, these are all the scenarios, they would give you that. And then you can make your decision. And so basically the name that they gave to the group became a self-fulfilling prophecy. They were healing each other. And that's ultimately like what I want to get across. Like we can heal each other.
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
Yeah.
We had a clinician. We had a clinician, we had a conflict resolution specialist, violence intervention specialist. But for the most part, like we were part of the group. So everybody was on like an egalitarian level where everyone that was in the group was part of the group, even though, you could have this level of education, he could be on this level of education. Like at a certain point, even the facilitators, because we were all Black men, we were part of the group.
Right.
And so everybody would throw something out. And we would all try to be like, all right, man, I've been through that. Or if you didn't go through it, you would sit back and listen like, that's interesting. I ain't been through that, but that's interesting to hear that brother's perspective. So I say all that to say, like, in terms of like the brothers that we worked with around the issues of distrust and all of that, we developed peer support with the dudes that was in Life After the Gunshot too. And I think like being in Che really led that with our clinical counselor, Edward McCurdy. And I want to shout out him too because it's a unicorn. He's in a unicorn position to find a Black male therapist that like has been through that and can connect with brothers like on a clinical level, like you don't think you're in therapy. And that's ultimately what started happening with the brothers that, I don't want to say therapy, but healing. That's what started happening even in the clinical setting there, to the point where Slim on IG had posted, screenshotted his counseling session with our clinical counselor. He screenshotted it, like, because they were doing it on Zoom. He didn't use the audio, but then he put his caption like, it's cool to be in like counseling and go to a counselor. It's a thoroughbred, well-respected young boy from Benham Park putting that on IG. What kind of impact can it have on the rest of the people that's part of his team? Like, they looking at it like, well, he can do it.
Because that's all essentially what we doing. We're always just looking for what's cool.
Yeah.
As black men, it's always been, we talk about old heads.
Right.
Yeah.
You're looking at your old head to tell you what's cool. And really, your old head is nothing more than your therapist.
Right.
That's it.
If we keep it at $1, that's all the old head is old head. Yo, man, I'm going through woo, woo, woo. You know what I mean? So I love what you say of putting a spin on it. So that's not therapy. It's not counseling. But, peer healing.
Yeah. And destigmatizing mental health. I think it had a negative connotation associated with just going to therapy and talking to people, or getting people to realize that it's okay to talk to someone or tell them your feelings, because you feel like someone's going to weaponize what you tell them against you, right? Like if I share with you my thoughts, you might think I'm crazy. I know I've been through that. I shared my journey. I lost my mom. My mom was murdered when I was 23 on the island of Tobago. And I talk about like, I went to a therapist first, and I was just trying to like understand what was happening. And I didn't go until years later. And I felt very judged about just sharing with her the guilt that I had or the feelings that I had around that. And it took me a very long time to get to that point, because I was like, I don't want nobody to think I'm crazy, right? So imagine you going through a lot of issues in your community or throughout your whole entire life, and then you have this thing happen to you, and now you have to sit and talk to someone. It's very hard to say that because you don't want that person to judge you even further.
Right. And in the peer setting, I think it, like Kill was saying, you're looking for the validation.
Yeah.
So you're looking for somebody to validate your experiences because they've been through that. And when you have a group of people around the table who you hear in their conversation, you see their body language, you like, all right, this dude looks like me, or he sounds like me, or he comes from a neighborhood like mine, and he's basically saying things that I've always thought. I just never articulated that to anybody publicly. And then you hear one person saying it, and then it just opens up like the validation that you're not crazy. It's like, oh, well, I'm not crazy because I just heard three other people that's sitting here and say the same thing that I've been feeling the whole time, right? And sometimes you might sit and listen, which is cool. And then other times you might engage in a conversation, but I think it's like extremely healthy to be in that space where you have brothers that you feel comfortable, that you can be vulnerable with and talk to. And that, I would hear a lot of times things that from brothers, and then regardless of your age or where you come from. I could be from Philly, he from DC, he from Baltimore, but we all brothers at the end of the day. So like hearing another brother say, like my man Tone, he was like, yo, I always feel like I gotta wear a cape 24 hours a day. Like everybody think I'm on Superman time, but like, do I ever get a time not to be like that? Do I have to walk around all day with that S on my chest with a cape like I'm Superman? Like it's impossible. It's not sustainable. And like you hearing another brother saying that, and my man Tone, he would check in to the group and he would be driving his truck because he had to work at night. So imagine he on a group, he driving, but he's telling us, look, these are all the things that I'm going through. And it would be things that you going through in your life. And it would just validate things as a man from any walk of life that as a brother, you're like, yo, that resonates with me.
It's crazy because I think that's kind of it right there. That's where we have to start over. We got to start over. It's like you said, men, talking to men, allowing them to be rules. I love the whole putting your phone down. You know, if you got Rumble, if you got to do something, something needs to be handled. No phones need to be in here. You know, and I think that's the thing. So it's kind of just trying to find a way to piece all those things back into our communities.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So let me tell them where they could get at you, man. Where can they get at you if they need this type of expertise?
University of Maryland, you can hit me on my email, JRICHAR5, J Richard without the D, 5 at umd.edu. You can hit us on IG at Life After the Gunshot. You can DM me there. Doc Joe Rich, DOCJORICH on IG. Same thing on Twitter. And you can email us, lifeafterthegunshot at gmail.com. So there's a few ways. But IG probably, I would say, is the best way.
And where can they see the documentary?
www.lifeafterthegunshot.com. And you could also pull it up on YouTube.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. No doubt. Chandel, let's talk about Horton's Kids for a little bit.
Yeah. So like I mentioned in the beginning, Horton's Kids is a nonprofit that serves communities in Ward 8. And we work with 4 pillars, which is health and wellness, community family engagement, academics, and youth development.
All right. And we're sitting again in our media lab donated to us by In a Perfect World, where you can check podcasts out like the HK Couch. We got rap sessions coming up with our teens. We got Surface Noise, where I'm talking with different people in the organization so people can get to know them a little bit better. And, you know, a lot of stuff going on. Whole full recording studio. You know what I mean? So definitely check out hortonskids.org. Check us out on Twitter. It's Hortons_kids. On IG, it's just at Hortons Kids. Check us out. So many dope ways that you can get involved with us. So, you know, Chandel, where can I get at you?
So you can follow me on Instagram, which is Love by Chandel.
Harness your vibe.
Yeah.
All right. And with me is already Kill 889 everywhere, Twitter, IG, whatever. My bro, thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure speaking to you today.